dramatic, marked differences that have occurred over the last several hundred, several thousand years. So the wheat we have today is nothing like the wheat of the Bible.
Wow, that's really powerful. Many people are going to be depressed at the thought of no toast, no hamburger bread, no pasta, no crackers, no waffles, no pancakes. It goes on and on, doesn't it?
It does. Breakfast cereals, bagels, muffins. Now, by the way, one of the things you can do, and this is what I've been spending much of my time lately doing, is you can reimagine, you can recreate, Kim, these foods like a muffin or even pancakes. If you remake them with different ingredients, and by the way, this should not be confused with going gluten-free. If you want a disaster, replace wheat with gluten-free foods. So gluten-free foods, sadly, are often made, or almost always made, with cornstarch, rice starch, tapioca starch, and potato starch, among the very few foods that can raise blood sugar higher than even wheat. So unfortunately, people who think they're going to be gluten-free and buy that gluten-free multigrain loaf of bread are sending their blood sugars higher than even wheat does.
That's terrible that we don't all know that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have a booming gluten-free industry. It's going to reach $5 billion by 2015 based on a fundamental misunderstanding of nutrition. So what we don't want to do, of course, Kim, is replace a problem food, wheat, with another problem food, which is gluten-free foods, which is tantamount to saying let's eat jelly beans instead of wheat. So we don't want to do that. So what if we ask, can we remake, say, cheesecake or pumpkin pie or carrot muffins or fun things like that without wheat and without gluten-free ingredients? That's what I've been spending my day doing. I have those. There's a handful of recipes, about 40 of them in the book. I also put a lot of these recipes on my blog, the Wheat Belly blog that accompanies the book. And so I'm going to put up a recipe either tonight or tomorrow, probably for raspberry cheesecake. I put up a recipe for pumpkin pie just before Thanksgiving. So I'm trying to help people recreate some of those fun foods. One of the toughest things to do is to do either a flatbread or sandwich bread. I'm getting very close to having a very nice flatbread. Sandwich bread is going to be a little tougher. So it's not as if you have to have this life of deprivation. You're never going to have another muffin or cookie. You can.
I've heard that coconut flour is way better for you than any type of wheat flour. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Coconut flour is a common ingredient in a lot of these recipes I have, as is ground nuts, like ground almonds. We use a lot of coconut milk, lots of fun ingredients. And you can make a very delicious, by the way, carrot cake.
Really?
You can make a very, very nice cheesecake, chocolate chip cookies to die for. So this is not just eating spinach salad and salmon. This is eating those things too, real foods, but also you can have plenty of indulgences. You know, I had for breakfast this morning 2 pieces of raspberry cheesecake with some eggs too.
Now, you've lost a lot of weight, you said, too.
Yeah, years ago I made the silly mistake of hearing one of my colleagues, Dr. Dean Ornish.
Yes.
And, of course, he's an advocate of a strict low-fat diet. I was attending the meetings at the American College of Cardiology in Atlanta. This was at a day, Kim, when my day was filled with procedures. My background is I trained to do procedures like angioplasty, atherectomies, laser angioplasty, stents. That was what I was trained for. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do day till night. Well, I just happened to see that Dr. Ornish was speaking, and I thought, well, I'm going to listen just for fun. So I heard his philosophy on cutting all the meats and all the excess oils out of your diet and just eating grains, fruits, and vegetables.
Oh, my God.
So I gave it a try. Now, I was living in Cleveland at the time, and I used to go jogging 3 to 5 miles a day along the Chagrin River. I gained 30 pounds. My HDL cholesterol went to 27. My triglycerides went to 350, which is sky high. And I became a diabetic while I was jogging every day. That was my first demonstration that this notion of cutting your fat and eating more healthy whole grains was not only ineffective, it is a catastrophe. And that's what I saw happen in other people, too, by the way.
Regarding diabetes, you present in the book how there's like a window where you can stop it or catch it or reverse it. And then there's a point where you can't reverse it. Why?
The turning point probably comes, Kim, when you've exhausted your pancreatic function. In other words, the pancreas is responsible for producing insulin, among other things. But if you have kicked and beaten your poor pancreas over the years from overexposure to carbohydrates, and if your pancreas is unable to produce more than 50% of its normal insulin output, you might find that even with the most meticulous effort, even with achieving ideal weight, you still might have a diabetic range blood sugar. So the key is to take these kinds of steps before that happens. So I was diabetic 20 years ago. I'm no longer diabetic. And I have lots of patients, for instance, who are former diabetics and have normal blood sugars and normal hemoglobin A1C. That's that measure of 60 days blood sugar in the normal range. And I don't mean what the laboratory tells us normal, because that's nonsense. I'm talking about truly ideal normal. Ideal and what a laboratory says is normal are two different things, two completely different things. So I aim for a hemoglobin A1C, this long-term blood sugar measure, of 5.0% or less. Diabetes is about 6.5 and higher. So mine is 4.8%. I have plenty of people who are former diabetics who have hemoglobin A1Cs of 5.0% or less on no drugs. There's that occasional person who is overweight, overconsumed carbohydrates, had high triglycerides, which causes pancreatic damage for so long that even with meticulous effort, they're left with a fasting blood sugar of 140. Thankfully, that's uncommon. Most people, I believe, who are currently diabetic have high hopes of not having diabetes, but it means removing the foods that make us diabetic.
You said, as it happens, wheat-free, gluten-free diets are also amylopectin A-free?
That's right. So if we remove amylopectin A, the unique form of carbohydrate in wheat, we remove one of the most flagrant high blood sugar raising foods. So in other words, if I compare 2 slices of whole wheat bread, the blood sugar consequences of eating 2 slices of whole wheat bread, blood sugar goes higher than 6 teaspoons of table sugar. And that's because the amylopectin A of wheat is highly susceptible to digestion by the enzyme amylase in the mouth and stomach. So we're told to eat this food, in effect, that raises blood sugar higher than table sugar, higher than many candy bars. And high blood sugars are followed inevitably by high blood insulin. And that sets in motion an entire cascade of events that leads to visceral fat accumulation.
And I want to talk about the distinction between fat and visceral fat. You make this clear distinction I think the audience should hear.
Yeah, visceral fat, this stuff, the deep fat that lives around your kidneys and liver and intestines and sticks out in the front, what I call a wheat belly, is a very, very different fat. It's highly inflammatory. In fact, if you were to biopsy it, it kind of looks like pus. In other words, it's filled with inflammatory white blood cells. Unlike the fat, say, in your backside or your thigh or your arms, that fat is relatively quiescent. It's not inflamed. Well, this inflamed fat that encircles your tummy and organs and sticks out, what I call a wheat belly, of course, those inflammatory cells emit those inflammatory proteins into your bloodstream. And that causes a whole set of other problems. It blocks insulin, so a big tummy makes you have a higher blood sugar. It causes inflammation in distant places. So a big tummy is commonly associated with hip arthritis and knee arthritis. And it raises cancer risk and high blood pressure. So visceral fat is a very, very unique active organ and produces oodles of inflammatory signals.
You said that it's not a problem to have fat in your diet, which I've known that for years, but I think the general public is still brainwashed about fat, that the fat creates fat. And you say no, correct?
That's right. Even the most forward-looking scientists in nutrition, such as Dr. Ron Krauss at UCSF, and Dr. Frank Sachs at Harvard, Dr. Frank Hugh, even including some of the nutritionists who helped craft originally the low-fat American Heart Association diet, have all published publicly their retractions. Total fat and saturated fat have nothing to do with heart disease. What they do is they amplify the effects. if you look at blood markers and metabolic markers, you'll find that fat does not cause